Hi, welcome to Abicair's Listen Up Recovery Podcast. My name's Eddie Clark, and today we've got a special guest, Darren McGarvey. Welcome, Darren.
Hello, Eddie. How you doing?
Good, thanks. Good, thanks for coming along. Okay, we'll just go straight into it. Darren's an author, broadcaster, an artist. Darren's written Poverty Safari, The Social Distance Between Us,
Yep.
and he's got an upcoming book coming out later on this year.
Yeah.
Darren's also a person in recovery himself, lived experience of recovery, and his new book is going to be focused on trauma. What's the name of the new book, Dan?
The title is Trauma Industrial Complex, and the subtitle we're still working out, but it'll be some version of oversharing in an age of lived experience. So it's about people talking about their lives publicly in a way that maybe they're not always ready to.
Brilliant. And that's something you've been doing workshops on recently that I attended recently.
Aye. That's right. We did the Telling Stories Safely workshop up at in Merchant City. It was just a pilot really around this project that's been set up by a GP and some other people in the recovery sector about getting trainee doctors in the room with people with experience of addiction, and trying to redress that imbalance sometimes with the quality of education of health professionals around the specifics of addiction. And so the idea of the workshop was to get the people with experience of addiction to be thinking more consciously and with greater intention about why is it they're sharing their story and how to communicate effectively so that the message that they want to carry to a doctor when they've got the chance to maybe this could save lives, then they land that message. And that's about sitting and really going into the detail and thinking about why do I tell them the story about my life? Is the story all true? What's important in this story? Is it the things that happened to me, or is it what I learned from it? And the workshops went really well. It was a mixture of people with lived experience and also professionals of various persuasions. So look out for them in future.
No, it's something that I really enjoyed, and it's something we can discuss throughout the show as well, because we're in an age where we see an awful lot of people, don't we, kind of sharing their stuff online with kind of social media, and a lot of people maybe regretting it, leaving themselves open, leaving themselves vulnerable, and having to face the implications that comes with that. And that will all tie in with the kind of theme of today, obviously, regarding your new book, around about kind of trauma, people sharing trauma. We're safe to share that kind of content, and what kind of stuff do you need to keep for professionals and for yourself, and obviously from an Abicair perspective and stuff like that, it's about, we need to protect people and be able to signpost them to the right place to get the professional help. So we can talk about that as the show goes on. We'll speak about that. Obviously, you're somebody with lived experience of addiction recovery yourself, Dan. Hopefully, we can open up regarding that a wee bit about your journey there. Then we can move on to the workshops and your book and stuff. Is that okay?
Of course, aye. Of course. So, I mean, my story's not really that unusual in terms of, the backstory to how I became somebody that was dependent on alcohol and drugs, just to sort of function or feel okay. I grew up in a household where that was happening, so my mother was the one who was using alcohol a lot. Story's quite well documented as well, because I have talked about it publicly. But it wasn't really until my kind of teens when I moved away from home and I was on my own, and a lot of, trauma and things like that started to come into play in adolescence, as it does. And I began drinking more. And, it worked. It worked because I felt better when I done it. I was excited at the prospect of doing it whenever it was on the cards, and I would move heaven and earth and sometimes quite vast sums of money for a guy of my modest means then to make it happen. When this idea came in about getting on it, it was like the volume of the world just turned down, and that became as addictive as the substance. I've heard people talking in the past about they'll be in a pretty bad withdrawal. And once they make the decision to score, then the withdrawal symptoms are relieved and the body begins to prepare for the reintroduction of the drug, you know. So there was the drinking behaviour, there was all the rituals around it. That all became part of what I thought at the time was a lifestyle that I chose, when actually my whole personality began to just consist of places I would drink, things I would drink, things I would do and say when I was drunk, stories I would tell about those things, music that I would write about those things. It all revolved around alcohol, but I just couldn't see it at the time. And that went on for 6 or 7 years until it sort of brought me to my knees in the usual way, you know, and I decided to try and give recovery a go.
So see, at that point you're speaking about, Darren, when you're involved in that lifestyle, the substance use or whatever, maybe in hindsight or even at the time, what part do you feel trauma played in it at that point? Were you aware of that's what you were doing? You were medicating some form of trauma? Or was it just what was happening in your life at that time and you knew what you were doing?
I think the role that trauma played was that it meant that my default state, my factory settings, like my emotional baseline was anxious, right? So I was anxious around people. I was anxious doing things. I was certainly anxious in romantic relationships. And what alcohol provided was this first penny drop moment of there's another way to feel, because I never knew there was another way to feel. No, I'm not saying I walked around as a child eternally depressed and self-serious and, you know, I had a good childhood, I had good family, but there were incidents that happened as the result of my mother's chaotic life through her addiction that just left such a big imprint on me. And it wasn't necessarily the size of the imprint, but it was that in our family system and in our family culture at the time, this language of trauma and attachment, it wasn't available to us. So there was tried and tested ways of dealing with how trauma came up in everyone's behaviour. And it was to criticise, to punish, to emotionally withdraw. Because when you're dealing with a lot of people who are all experiencing some level of untreated trauma, one of the ways that manifests is a kind of selfishness. When you get triggered, it makes you selfish. Other people's needs are too much because your body and nervous systems went into self-protection. And that's obviously no great in a family, you know, where there's a lot of trauma that's unresolved. It means when a real crisis hits, those big emotional meteorites come down, that you can't be there for each other the way you need to be, because the trauma can only be healed in a context of nurturing, understanding, relationships, love, basically. And for me, I think that basically just left me vulnerable to being captured by anything that took that feeling away. And naturally, I just kept pursuing that feeling that came from drinking or the rituals around it until eventually at some point I crossed a line, whether it was genetic, cultural, some other biological threshold, who knows? But there came a point where I couldn't control how much I was drinking once I started. Parties would go from 1 night to 2 days to 3 days. The hangovers were terrible. I started thinking that I had real serious clinical mental health problems and went down various rabbit holes with services trying to get them diagnosed, because I wanted it to be anything but the fact that I had to stop drinking. And that's what addiction does to your mind. You know, it'll have you believing that you're clinically schizophrenic, because that in a strange way is more comforting than the prospect that you might have to learn how to live without this thing you've been using to cope. And it takes a lot of time to get your head around that.
So if we take you back a wee bit there, what you were saying, and it's that question, we put a lot of emphasis on what's wrong with addiction, don't we? We don't speak too much about what it brings to that person, you know, the reasons why they're using it and the reasons why we continue using it despite the consequences. So are you saying that was your experience where it was to change how you felt?
It was to change how I felt. I often felt, you know, different chemicals and substances helped in different situations. So it wasn't really until the kind of midpoint of my alcohol and drug career that I kind of discovered downers. which was the thing that I would probably say I enjoyed the most, because they just attack anxiety. You know, they just remove it for a while. And what I noticed was that when I had taken Valium or temazepam, or when you could get them, jellies, which were still kind of going about then, although they weren't they weren't as sort of available as maybe they had been in the 90s. I noticed that for however I was debilitated or constrained by the effects of the drug, mentally, I was able to think quite clearly. So often I would have some of the best, most articulate, thoughtful conversations with people when I was under the influence of those drugs, because they cleared my mind in a way that meant I wasn't so preoccupied with what am I saying? Am I saying this the right way? Am I making a mistake? Does this person like me? An aspect of who I really am began to come through. And I found that also with uppers, you know, ecstasy. I think really kind of, it dissolves your ego for a wee while. And what I noticed was when my ego was dissolved, I was very interested in looking after other people, and I was very interested in listening to other people and really letting other people know I was there and I was there for them and that they had my full attention. I would look after people at parties, make sure that they all had the water, if everybody got a fag, does anybody need anything? But not in a kind of people pleasing way, I want everybody to like me. That's a genuine part of my nature. The problem with the drugs that you use is that if you kind of stop using them, that becomes your preoccupation. And if you can't get them, then all these other aspects of your nature come through, or shadows of your nature. So you go from being caring and sensitive to being selfish and insensitive. You go from being humble to being arrogant. And my whole addiction cycle was characterized by swinging very extremely from one pendulum to the next. So you have a lot of people out there who knew me through my drinking, who know me as arrogant, who know me as a bully, who know me as a toxic person. And then you'll have all these other people who's like, couldn't meet a nicer guy. Oh, I remember this thing he did for me. What a laugh he was. That's addiction. Do you know what I mean? Like it kind of turns us into two people that can't really be reconciled. And it's only through recovery you get an insight into what's driving all that. You know what I mean? But you need to get sober first.
So what point would you say that changed for you during your active addiction? What was the point? Did you get a moment of clarity to say, I've crossed a line here, things are different now, it's just consequences now rather than enjoyment, I'm affecting people around about me?
See, I was sort of cursed with awareness of alcoholism and addiction early on because of how I grew up, and being quite a practical person in terms of how I apply lessons immediately when I know there's a better way of doing something. I thought this inoculated me for becoming an addict or an alcoholic, because I had seen how it had gone. I had seen the house fires. I had seen the people trying to come through doors in the middle of the night and mad blazing domestic arguments, you know, where you're just no safe. I had seen knives out. I had seen people getting set about. I'd seen it all. Do you know what I mean? And I thought, well, the power of those experiences will mean I will not go down that path. I have every reason to avoid that. And I had experimented with alcohol, and it didn't grab me. I didn't like everything that came with it. I didn't like people going for being all right to spewing all the time and vomiting, or people acting like BAMs, or suddenly everybody's greeting, and suddenly this thing that wasn't important is now everybody's all crowded round trying to sort out a big drunken drama. But it was when my mother died and I got handed a beer after the funeral. It wasn't just the alcohol, it was the whole situation. I was the center of the attention that day because I was a man. You know what I mean? I was dressed in a suit, long coat, black tie, being handed a cold beer by somebody who's now dead through drugs, actually, funnily enough. But there was all that came together and activated something where I was like, oh, this is what I should be doing. Do you know what I mean? And I remember actually going back to school that day, which was kind of weird. It was like the alcohol provided a suit of armor that I immediately wanted to try out in a school environment where I usually felt a lot of anxiety. Do you know what I mean? And the moment for me where the penny dropped that I was crossing a line came early. But as often is the case when you're young, you say, I've got a lot of time to sort this out. And so it just got worse and worse and worse. But I mean, I was 21 and I remember buying a bottle of cider instead of buying like a power card or something. Do you know what I mean? And I didn't even drink the cider every day. I just left it in the house, which shows you the function it was playing early on. I was living on my own in supported accommodation, and this was like a companion, you know, and that's what it became. It travelled with me. It slept beside me when nobody else had time for me, or I couldn't get anywhere else or whatever. It was always there to console me. And you know, in that sense, it was a very loyal friend, but it's very possessive as a friend as well. It doesn't want anybody else to have you. It wants you all the time, and it'll kill you. It'll kill you to get what it wants, you know. And luckily, I got out before the health problems and all that got super serious.
Okay, so you're speaking there, about you lost your mum at, how old was that?
16.
16. Was that you on your own then with life? Did your family there, kind of adults that supported you, or did you feel you?
I was
you
already
wanted
out the house.
Okay.
I was out, you know, and it was just the usual kind of, you know, you're a teenager, you've got mad instincts that are pulling you in mad directions. You do some dumb shit, you lie about it, then you come clean, and the real injury is no caused by what you've done, but how long you've been dishonest about it. No, because you know, the maybe the lack of certain things in the previous generation's upbringing, some situations might not have been handled the way that they could have been. It's a bit silly to throw a 16-year-old boy out into the world.
Yeah.
But just by chance, within a week of me being out the house, we got this call that my mum was sick. Now, she had told so many lies through the years, I don't think any has really batted an eyelid, but within a week she was dead. Do you know what I mean? So it was difficult because in a moment where the family should be grouping together and providing each other support, I'm having conversations on phones that are going between the basic information of how my ma's died to being really strained arguments because all the other stuff is coming through into an argument because none of us know how to conduct ourselves. Now, fair enough. In my defence, I was a kid, but some of us, we can stay kids right into our fucking our adulthood. Do you know what I mean? If we don't look at the wounds that we're carrying. And so really it was just in that year, 2001, you saw a lot of developmental chickens coming home to roost, you know what I mean? Across generations. The meteorite hits, everybody runs for cover into whatever gives them temporary comfort. Do you know what I mean? So I was tossing about on aunties' sofas, my grannies, my mates, and then eventually I kind of rolled up at this supported accommodation project, the fire station project, in Maryhill, where my situation stabilised in a sense. It was no risk of me becoming homeless. There were support workers there, but also this became a kind of prelude to many years of benefit dependency, alcoholism getting more and more serious because I was living on my own and I needed that tool to cope. But I think it was round about, it was round about sort of my mid-20s towards my end of my 20s when I only had maybe 3 or 4 years of real serious alcoholic drinking, and not even to the point where I had DTs and all that, just obsessed. You're young, you're resilient, you get up and you get on with it.
Yeah.
But this thing was just attacking my mind, you know, and I was letting people down a lot. I was letting, you know, my partner at the time down. I think she probably saw the worst of it. Do you know what I mean? Because my relationship with her, it was towards the end of it that I started thinking I need to try and do something about this. But it was that kind of, you know, you get a few weeks sober, then you try and experiment again, and then you're back out for months. It was really like maybe 5 or 6 years after that it was undeniable to me. I was hanging around mostly with other people who had a drink problem. I lost a job working with other young people in a prison because I was turning up and I was clearly smelling alcohol. My attitude was all over the place. Relationships breaking down. It's when those consequences start to hit that it's no longer as easy to deny it, you know, that you've got to do something about it.
Definitely. Do you think round about the kind of the consequences? I always had that way where I think on my own, left to my own devices, I was willing for the deterioration of quality of life, deterioration physically, mentally, and stuff like that. But it's when the actual consequences outside were continuous. You know, it really does wear you down, take something away from you that certainly for me, it brought me to that point. I need to do something different here with that. It was the same myself.
It was, and I think that's obviously the danger and the risk with consequences being the thing that brings you back to a state of reasonableness around it, is that for some years the consequences you can't come back from. So the consequences for my mother was death, right? You don't rebound back from that. You're gone. All you can hope for is that there are lessons learned from that tragedy and other people implement them in their own lives. For me, the consequences came, first financially, just that constant financial insecurity, ducking and diving, no matter how much money I had, no matter how much money I was able to generate or make. And I was quite industrious. I mean, I didn't doss about. For years, people would have saw me. I qualified as a community arts practitioner. I was very active in the Scottish music scene. Do you know what I mean? Making a name for myself and making a name for hip hop in Scotland just by existing and the amount of stuff that I was doing. So I'd done a load of stuff. Do you know what I mean? But I was never able to be consistent with it, and the quality of what I was doing always varied because there was this difficulty in the background. So it was when I was no longer able to even do those things that were second nature that the consequences were felt. And also, I would say in the hip hop scene, I started to get a sense that my reputation had become something that wasn't a true reflection of who I really was. You know, any gigs I'd done, they would sometimes just devolve into rammies or riots. Sometimes people would get seriously hurt. And it wasn't always a direct result of things that I'd done, but it would be partly a consequence of the tension that follows you around. And when you're moving around in kind of male communities, you move around in packs. So whatever enemies you've got, everybody else has got, and everybody's jumping in for everybody, no matter who's right or wrong. And people are going to get hurt out of that. Do you know what I mean? And I was finding, I just felt sometimes everywhere I went, there was a level of resentment building up towards me that when I went into a space and I detected it, based on my own sense of how clear my faculties were that day, that could be the spark that lights a situation where then you've got riot vans rolling up or people getting run over in motors. And I'm not that kind of person. If you go back to Pollock and talk to the people I went to school with, they would not associate me with that. That was alcohol, and that was me almost adopting a persona that felt like safety armor. The person who's no scared, the person who'll go ahead, or the person who'll be able to persuade somebody just through words that they don't want to fight. So nobody needs to find out if I can fight or no, because I'll just talk you out of it. Do you know what I mean? I say is a high risk strategy, because there's always going to be one person that's going to be like, I do want to fight and I'm going to batter you. Do you know what I mean? And that also is a consequence. But generally, you know, then the legal consequences, you know what I mean? It's nights in the cells, you're on the police radar. Sometimes they're just coming into your house because they know they'll find something. Yeah. And all of that just becomes a massive pain in the arse.
Can we speak a wee bit about that? So you're speaking there about kind of the progression of your addiction and where your life's going at that point. So at what point did you start writing, start rapping? When did you start becoming an established kind of hip hop artist?
That all preceded the alcohol and drugs. I got into hip hop before I left Pollock. My dad encouraged that because he's a musician. He encouraged me not to conform to the norms in Pollock at the time, which most people watching will be familiar with if you grew up in a scheme or are vaguely familiar with the concept. Football in, try to pull birds in, having access at any one time to a very limited 200-word vocabulary, even if you're more articulate or your emotions are more complex and can be expressed through one-syllable sentences. And do you know what I mean? Like, anything outside of that is gay. Anything outside of that gets attacked, gets criticised. You get a signal very, very quickly. If you step out of these bounds, McGarvey, you're going to have to fight for your right to be who you are. Luckily for me, I was up for that fight, you know, for day one. I come from a family where we stand up to bullies, and that was difficult, but I went for it. So who I was already well in motion when I was at school. I was selling cassette tapes. I was hand drawing the covers and recording music, and I'd sit and record them on my cell on, tape players, WAN tapes playing the thing, the blank tapes recording the audio, and I'd just go into school with a pile of them and just horn them out. Do you know what I mean? Then I got a job at the bingo, started rapping with a Scottish accent. I would burn the CDs, I would sell them at the bingo. I was working in the bingo for about 3 weeks, and before I was then calling the main stage. Do you know what I mean? Because I was a natural. I was a natural in front of a crowd. I could control a crowd. And I was only 18, 19 years old. So I had a lot of experience of the stage and also of dealing with difficult, dangerous people. You know what I mean? So going into a hip hop scene, there was a lot of things a lot of other artists were still working out in the hip hop scene. But when I got there, I was already kind of fully formed. I could rap, I could perform, I could deal with challenge. There was none of this, and then once you start adding the bucket and the codeine on top of that, do you know what I mean? For a wee while, you're kind of bulletproof.
Yeah. And where was the Scottish hip hop scene at that time, Dan? Was it?
It was a resurgence happening. So it really began in the 80s, no long after, obviously, hip hop started getting played in the United States and beamed out here. And I was part of maybe the kind of third wave of it here. So it was the turning point at the millennium where it was becoming a pop culture. So you had, Tupac, Biggie at the end of the 90s, and then the turn of the century, you had Eminem, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg again coming out, and all that stuff was just anywhere you went, that was getting played out of motors. Do you know what I mean? It was everywhere. And so I came up at a time where hip hop had this commercial accessibility now, which then created expectations and culture that it should sound a certain way. So that was the big battle we took on as young people who were rapping in our own accents, because obviously most of us weren't black, but that's the first criticism you get because you should be black if you're doing that. And it's always white people that say that. Do you know what I mean? It's always white consumers who only listen to Eminem that say shit like that. So that was a buzz, you know what I mean? I met all like my lifelong friends at that time. We would connect with each other, making songs, and you're just living for the day. You don't feel you have a lot of responsibility. And I loved that, going up Kelvin Grove Park, we were hanging, some of my pals were like rollerbladers. Some of them were kind of, graffiti artists. Some of them were DJs. Most of them were MCs like me. Do you know what I mean? And that was the kind of hip hop scene. And then every now and then we all get together for a gig and we would all show our new material. So we didn't really care whether it was big or no. Nobody was trying to be famous. What we cared about was that the other artists that we respected our so we all pushed each other just by being creative. And that's one of the things that's unique to hip hop in Scotland, because there's no real big outlet culturally for our stuff. We make this stuff for each other.
Okay.
And this means you've got this kind of steel sharpening steel sort of thing where the people that are doing it consistently are doing it for the love, because there's not a lot of money in it. You know what I mean? Unless you're somebody like me with a platform who can capitalise on things. Most people are just doing it for the love and probably making a big loss on it.
So, see, when your material at that time, maybe in the earlier days, was that a big outlet for you regarding what was going on internally?
It was a big outlet, and without that outlet, I don't know what I'd have done. I was able to express feelings and emotions, anger, sadness, contempt, fear. And I would say probably back then at that point in the hip hop scene, my stuff, all the stuff that would have been going about would have been the stuff with the most emotional resonance. And that wasn't really a reflection of me as a person. It was a reflection of what I was going through at the time. The music became a necessary outlet. But also something else began to happen, which was I started to develop an intuition about how my music was affecting listeners and what listeners expected from me. And also for the first time ever, how other people seen me as a result of the music. And what that does is then, especially with the alcohol and the drugs beginning to take hold, you start developing a narrative about yourself and a story that you tell yourself or about yourself that's not necessarily a story that could always stand up in a court of law. and the lines between art and reality get blurred. Now that's all right if you're an artist who's intentionally trying to do that, but at the time I wasn't. At the time I was living more and more in the story I was creating through my music, a kind of mythos about my own life. And a lot of artists do it, you know. But I think as the drinking developed and the victim mindset developed, and actually I started to become the villain in other people's stories, and there were harms coming from my behaviour that I wasn't willing to look at because I was in this victim headspace. The music began to feel different, you know what I mean? It wasn't as sort of, I guess, open-minded and self-aware. It became this weapon, you know what I mean? A weapon to strike people, a weapon to hold people accountable while absolving myself of any blame for things, whether that's politicians, whether that's, you know, perpetrators, whatever it was. But the music's where I've always sort of figured it all out, you know, and for me, without that outlet, even sometimes to get it wrong, to make mistakes, then I don't know what other means I would have, because music offers a very specific type of facility for you where you can be wrong, you can make mistakes, the music might still be good, you know what I mean? And it's there for you to learn from. And that's always been my relationship with making tunes, to be honest.
So see, when we were speaking about your kind of recent work regarding kind of sharing your story and stuff like that, and yourself being in the kind of limelight for a lot of years, and you've spoken in the past about you've been very open regarding that stuff. What kind of dangers does that bring for somebody? How can that be used against you?
Telling your story is a very necessary part of embarking on a healing process, whatever that process might be. Say you've been diagnosed with an illness, right? A life-affecting illness. Say somebody close to you's died. Say you've lost a child. Say you have trauma. Say it's an addiction. There's a healing journey that has to go on where you try to get back to your baseline function to get through life, right? And sharing your experience will be part of that. Where and how you share your experience, though, is really pivotal in determining the quality of the healing journey. And today we live in an age where what's being modelled to people is you just jump on Facebook and you tell everybody every single detail of what's going on in your life. Now, that doesn't mean that you're wrong for doing that. All I'm saying is that anyone who has done that will have experienced consequences, right? And those consequences are relative to the platform in which the story is shared. For me, that platform was national newspapers, international newspapers. It was evening news, UK wide. It was television shows and social media campaigns. Ultimately, at the precise moment where my story, as I told it, was at the absolute height of public visibility, that was the moment the penny dropped that maybe I'd said too much.
Okay.
So it was already too late. And so this phase of my work is less about class politics and less about poverty and more about bringing to bear the lessons that I learned in a culture that demands public disclosure, whether it's your Netflix true crime stuff, Baby Reindeer, so much stuff out there is really part of a genre called lived experience. It's not called that, but it all relies on people exposing themselves in various ways because there's opportunities there to help people to experience catharsis, to upcycle your trauma into something meaningful. Sometimes it might be a job opportunity. I mean, we know that many people currently in the drug sector are getting opportunities as a direct result of their lived experience of addiction. But that's a different type of thing than being a person who talks about their life publicly.
Yeah.
And really, the consequences will be whatever level of visibility your story takes, or even if it takes no visibility, but it triggers in you a paranoia of having said too much, you will feel a wee bit vulnerable. What do people think? You will have people who dispute the details of your story, who are connected to your story, because, well, we have this kind of narcissistic, well, it's my story and it's my truth. No story happens in isolation. All trauma occurs in a relational environment where there are other people who remember it differently or who don't think talking about it openly and publicly is the way that you deal with it if they want to deal with it at all. And so my work just now is about identifying all of these things, putting a language to it to try and make it safe for a conversation that has been going on behind closed doors come out into the mainstream, which is there are perverse incentives at play sometimes in terms of how we platform people, what we encourage them to talk about. Recognize that, recognize there's need to be more conscious around that, and then use my experience of having gone through that and being very open in a kind of contradictory way, really. Because the book says, hold your horses, listen to this story. Do you know what I mean?
So that's what I was going to go into, Dan. I come up to see you at the Fringe last year. I came up to see your Fringe show. Amazing. But there was a show prior to it. Was it pre-Fringe show or something? And I went along there, and then it was obviously it was kind of focused on trauma.
This is a campaign launch at the Royal Society of Edinburgh.
Yeah, that's right. In there, and went along, not knowing what really truly to expect. I think it was yourself and a counsellor as
Miriam
well.
Taylor, psychotherapist.
Psychotherapist, Miriam Taylor. And you read a snippet from your new book that's going to be coming out. And you used the word kind of contradicted there, and I'm like, I thought it was meant to be about the opposite of this. And you shared some stuff in there that I so really related to. Still kind of, I still feel it just now when you read it out, and it was like flashes of childhood, snippets of childhood. Was some really kind of deep stuff going on in there, and how a child is perceiving these events going on and stuff like that, and very much parts of my childhood. That's what it's very much like, a flash.
Fragments
of it, so writing wise, it's absolutely outstanding, and the content outstanding. But I was there like, so Dan's here saying this, but he's actually went deeper than I've heard him going before as well. Have you found yourself in a place where you're like, I've exposed myself in the past, and I'm of the understanding what can come back to me, and how I would maneuver that, or how I would cope with that? Would that be fair?
It is, but also subtly it's trying to make a comment about trauma voyeurism. So I spend the first part of the book basically describing all the mechanics of how the lived experience industry came about, what the incentives are in terms of platforming vulnerable people, third sector, talk about being sensitive to people's needs, and then at the same time there's some dodgy practices go on behind the scenes because campaigns need visibility, so they need raw, real, authentic stories. I'll lay all that bare in part one, so the people, if I've done my job right, will think they're reading a certain type of book. Then they get to part two, where I turn it all on its head, and I use all those techniques on the reader. And so what I try to show is the power of stories, even if somebody's literally gone like that. And these stories, there's a bit of manipulation going on with them, and they're not always true. They're a reflection of how somebody wants to be seen. We shouldn't use one person's experience as an avatar for a whole demographic. And all these things, I'm laying it all out, and then in part two, I'm like, boom. Induce the reader into hypnosis. Because what they're dealing with me is somebody who understands the terrain and who understands storytelling. So what I'm showing you is, here is what a story looks like when the author has full control, when I'm the director of the story, Doesn't it make it truer? Doesn't it make it more important? Doesn't it mean it's anybody's experience but mine? But what I'm asking the reader is, you say that you care about people with trauma, but here you have just bought this book, which contains this stuff. And what kind of signal is your consumer behaviour sending to people? Because the incentives are obvious. The book must contain this in order for it to be more widely read. And, that's a game all authors or producers of any content play. It's interesting that true crime is the fastest growing genre. And people will talk about how they love true crime. In a way, they wouldn't talk about how they love pornography. But it's the same thing. You know what I mean? You don't get people going like, oh, aye, man, I just watched a 12 guy bukkake last night. It was so realistic. Honestly, you could see the trauma in the woman's eyes. She was thinking, what has become of my life? You wouldn't do that, would you? Because that would be disgusting. It'd be disgusting to say publicly that you watched a video like that. But it's all right to go, aye, I watched the Hang last night. Guy chopped his veins up into wee tiny bits, put it in a suitcase. That footage of him got to the shop to buy the knife. Oh, he's so cool, calm, collected. Love that true crime shit. What's the difference?
Yeah.
What's the moral difference? So it's just, there's all this confusion, really. What we really are looking for is something real, because our culture feels so clinical and so polished and so managed within an inch of its life that even the most disgusting or the most private, traumatized moments of somebody's life, for a brief moment, feel like we're connecting with something that's real, something that we can identify with. But when you're operating from active trauma and you're participating in that, you're going to get re-traumatized if your story gets platformed in the way that you want it to. And for me to tell that story convincingly and really show people the things that I need to show them for this to land the way it's going to land, hopefully, I need to tell my story, you know, but I need to know why I'm telling it, and I need to know the consequences that might follow from it, which I think I do.
So we're seeing so many people now follow suit, aren't they, on kind of certainly on social media. Maybe listening to people, not particularly yourself, but other people share their trauma, but also share their kind of recovery aspect of it. You know, a lot of people who will speak about or write about their trauma, hopefully have received support with that, and that they're in a kind of similar place to yourself, where they're able to kind of view that with a bit of clarity and not just spill the mess everywhere. But what we're seeing is people being really influenced by that, you know, or searching for traumatic events in their life, and like you were saying earlier, involving other people in that, you know, this happened to me, etc., and stuff like that. And I believe that's what the dangerous area, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, see, for yourself, how would you describe trauma itself?
Trauma, there are lots of different definitions in play, right? But they all kind of, the legitimate definitions, they boil down to some variant of this, right? An event, series of events, or circumstances that overwhelm a person's capacity to cope by themselves. Usually, trauma arises when the fundamental assumptions of a relationship are thrown out the window in a split second. Right. Now, that could be a relationship with a partner. It could be a relationship with a parent. It could be a relationship with a public service. It could be a relationship with a community. Even a relationship with the natural world, public transport. You get on a bus, you think you're going from A to B, the bus crashes. Your assumptions about your relationship with that are tarnished. You lay a towel on a beach, you think you're having a nice holiday, you don't know there's a 10-foot tsunami coming up on the beach behind you. When that moment happens, a person is very suddenly disabused of the illusion of safety in a way that is so shocking. Their nervous system will not let them forget about it. And the only way that you can heal from that is first to establish safety, or what's called awareness building sometimes. Then you go on a journey of processing the trauma, which means testing the limits of what you can and cannot do, turning into the pain a wee bit sometimes. There's lots of different therapies out there. There's lots of different beliefs. Should you expose yourself to the trauma? Should you protect yourself from it? Should you focus on what happened? Should you focus on feelings? Does it live in the body? Does it live in the mind? But the same process occurs where there's a phase of, we're safe, now it's time to go into this. And then the final phase is releasing, right? Or recovery. And it's not linear. And you can go back. It's like recovery from addiction. You can have a relapse, then you're back, but you don't forget everything you learned. So you kind of you learn another lesson and then you go again. It's a bit like that. Unfortunately, what's happened with the the kind of the commodification of trauma as a result of an online marketplace where it's actually like a brand and part of an identity that you can
Yeah.
create for yourself now. What that sells is this idea of talking publicly about it as being an essential part of healing. Now, again, I'll say disclosure of trauma in the right context, therapeutic context, family context, support group context is essential. Even if it's just to give the people around you an insight into what your interpretation of your situation is and your interpretation of what happened. But that's a world of difference from doing an interview with the Daily Record about how you got slashed, doing an interview with ITV, Good Morning, about how your child died in a violent attack, or talking about, you know, your years of intravenous drug use, whatever it might be. You could talk about suicide attempts, you could talk about family breakdowns. If you go public and you're still quite close to the wound, then you might come to regret it years later unless certain things happen. And the book outlines what those things might look like, both for ourselves. Why are we doing it? Do we really want to raise awareness? Do we want to show people that we're doing better now because we carry shame for the way we used to live? Both of these answers are okay. But if we don't know why we're doing something, should we do it?
Yeah.
And, you know, some of us will come to learn the hard way about what our true motivations were and what the truth of our stories actually were. And many people will know some of them. They regret some of the things they said because they feel differently, you know.
When you realised that you'd probably kind of overshared your personal stuff, was there a would you describe that as a trauma itself?
It's definitely a uncomfortable experience and it can trigger core wounds.
Mm.
So that's not itself a trauma because it never overwhelmed my capacity to cope. And I was able to speak openly about it, which is things that aren't always happening when there's trauma going on or a culture that's creating trauma. But what I had to do was swallow my pride. What I had to do was accept, you know, the story wasn't just mine.
Mm.
And that maybe next time, I mean, I have a right to talk about whatever I want to talk about, right? And not everybody in my life who got upset with me talking publicly has earned the honour or my sympathy for their grief or their pain about that, to be perfectly frank, you know? But many have, and many I will listen to and consider and have considered. And I think what happens is if the story of what happened to you has become so tightly bound up in your identity that any challenge to that story is painful for you, you know, then if you sell 150,000 books, no all of them are going to be 100% on board with the version of the story you've told. And it's just the law of things going out into the world, really. And then we also have this culture now where, you know, a lot of campaigns, they'll be using a lived experience narrative to drive social media engagement, which is a direct invitation for the public to come and scrutinise a story or a narrative. And I don't blame people for doing these things. They're acting according to incentives and currents that are pushing them towards doing that. But what this book will attempt to do is drop a big log in the current and just stop it for a minute and say, we need to rethink about what's happening here. Because I foresee some tragedy arising as a result of someone's reaction to some aspect of their story becoming public in a way that they can't cope with, and people going on a witch hunt to find out how it happened. And it'll lead to an organisation, it'll lead to a charity, it'll lead to a government institution, it'll lead to a media organisation, and people will be there. And they'll not just be there because they care about that person, they'll be there because of all the prior resentments that they'll have about a particular issue that's got seen through a political lens, and it'll all get staged to make it look like they care about the vulnerable person when really it's all culture war bull. But this is the environment we're all operating in now. So the minute that we tell our story out into the world, we have to understand, as Bill Burr often puts it, it's getting cut with other people's bull, different grades of bull. And, so we need to be made of tough stuff to cope with that. Or we need to have support structures around us. And quite frankly, I don't think there's any protocol in place. Every organisation's improvising, freestyling it. Here's what we do because this is what feels right to us. And here's what we do because that feels right to us.
I remember that the psychotherapist we were speaking about earlier, the show leading up to the Fringe, and she was speaking about all these services that say they're trauma informed, and their staff have went on a 2-day kind of training, and she was making a very valid point that has not been trauma informed, you know. And she even admitted herself, look, she's still got a lot to learn after all those years, and how much a professional she is in trauma, you know, a lot to learn. So it's sometimes we can be kidded on, can't we, about where to go to kind of share that stuff, and not just share the stuff, but obviously try and get some kind of acceptance, resolve on that thing.
Aye, and often you see trauma informed being deployed or signposted in particular places where people have settled for the language around trauma changing, but the fundamental economic drivers that make it likely are remaining the same. So third sector, civic society, you know what I mean? The language gets fast tracked, the language of inclusivity, the language of diversity, the language of equity. The language of that stuff is ubiquitous now, all of it, including trauma, right? But we still live in societies where you stand far likelier to get traumatized as a result of the postcode you're born in. But because we're not ready to grapple with those questions, this language creates the mirage that something fundamental has changed, when really all we're using are different words to describe the same old forces and consequences. Now, obviously, a prison can't be trauma-informed in Scotland. It doesn't matter if it's got a stamp saying they're trauma-informed. It doesn't matter. The minute you walk through security in a prison, even if you're not accidentally carrying a gun or drugs, you're getting triggered. Even if you're going into work in there. That's how it's designed. It's supposed to keep you in a state of complete vigilance. The whole thing relies on you being traumatized for it to work. There's no rehabilitation in Scottish prisons because you get to go and write a wee song with somebody that comes in and plays guitar, or you get to draw a wee picture, you get to use a phone. Oh my God, it's like living in a Hilton. No, it's no. It's no. You're dubbed up for hours on end. You've got a severe case of bammed up syndrome. You're not allowed to express feelings or emotions that will get used against you. What does that sound like? Sounds like the kind of toxic family system that you grew up in. Do you know what I mean? That's no trauma informed. So sometimes it gets used really disingenuously, you know.
So back to the story. So when did you, at what stage of life did you arrive in recovery for the first time? And what support did you access?
I got sober, began the journey proper 2013. So I had just done kind of nightmare Christmas 2012. That was just a bad year and it ended badly. And my last hurrah was the kind of Christmas and New Year. After an interaction with somebody on social media who I've never met, a woman from America called Katie, who obviously had followed me on Facebook, maybe because she'd discovered me during the referendum campaign or something. She sent me this article, 6 Harsh Truths that will sort your life out or something like that. A self-helpy type thing, right? Anyway, it was about fucking 6 in the morning. I had a bottle of wine left and I was just trying to kill time for the boozer to open. So I started reading it, you know what I mean? And then I got to the end of it and the desire to drink just left me, you know what I mean? And it wasn't because it was a super erudite, intelligent, scientific literature. It was just because somebody had took a punt and says, do you know what, man, you might need to actually read this. You're full of self-pity. You're up your own arse. All you've been doing is moaning on Facebook for months and months and months, and I don't even know you and I'm sick of you. And she sent that, right? And I read that and that was it. So it's the truth. The truth. The truth punctured something. As hard as it was, and the desire to drink left. Why? Because I could see the truth and what the drink was doing to me for that brief moment. And I poured the drink away and I got sober and I didn't drink again for 2 years. And that was because quickly after I got sober and went through I sweated it out in my room for 2 days. I had already been to a few mutual aid groups and meetings, kind of 12-step type meetings. I was already getting a wee bit established there in terms of people knew I was a person who was in and out a lot. And so once I really got more involved, I already had people that I knew who were there, and I got a sponsor and I did the deal, you know. But my life improved so quickly that became the thing that sometimes would take me back out the door, because I would think, well, I'm all right now, so I'll get involved with this work, you know. So I went to college, studied journalism, became a qualified journalist, skin of my teeth, obviously. Then I started writing newspaper columns. Then I decided to crowdfunder to write a book. Boom, 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 boom. Everything just started going right. Do you know what I mean? But it was really kind of, I would say, when I really had to address the things was after the first book, you know, because I was at such a good place in my recovery when I was writing that book, and it shines through in the book, the tone of the book, the spirit of the book, but the success of it just took me completely off guard. I just didn't expect it to go as well as it did.
So me and you have spoke about this before, Dan. You speak about that at night. You okay to kind of share that at night? So where were you? What was happening? It was down London?
I was in London, and then the book, I found out the book was the number one. Do you know what I mean? And it was off the back of a radio interview I'd done on Radio 4. So I went in, nobody knowing who I was, and I came out and I'd sold thousands of books. And then I had another interview the next day with Jeremy Vine. Now, I went for having no really fussed. I didn't have mad expectations. I just thought the fact it was doing well in Scotland and that I was going on Radio 4 was for the Scottish audience and all the literary people that I wanted to get it right up them. I thought this is enough. But then my expectations went, oh, hang on a minute, this could be like a big time moment. Do you know, because I could see from my social media feeds and all that, I was like, I'm getting hundreds and hundreds of followers. There's just people messaging me for all over the country, for all over the world. So then suddenly this Jeremy Vine interview becomes this, all right, okay, well, I can't this up. Do you know what I mean? So I was like, I had to wait a whole day. My hotel I was staying in was right across the broadcasting house. It was right there. Everything set up, half an hour. I'm ready to go. Phone call comes. It's cancelled. They've pulled it. And for any normal, emotionally normal person who wasn't operating from wounds and unhealed trauma and fear and this idea that only if they were successful would they be worthy of love and acceptance in their life. When that interview got pulled, it felt as if the whole thing had crumbled. It was as if I had failed. And I couldn't cope with it. I could not cope with it. It was the extreme of being that high and then crashing back down, even though it wasn't a crash. Just complete madness. Because it had been months since I'd spoke to a sponsor. It had been weeks since I had been around anybody in recovery. I just thought, nobody can tell me nothing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I am actually the hottest property coming out of Scotland right now. Nobody can talk to me. That was the subconscious narrative. And turns out I was off my nut. You know what I mean? So I ran round to a Boots pharmacy, bought over the counter painkillers with enough codeine in them to take away the feelings that I had. And by the time I got back to Glasgow, I'm running off the Solpadeine and the ibuprofen equivalents. You know what I mean? Developing a tolerance so quickly, unaware of how much paracetamol I'm taking into my system while I'm doing it. So then I have to move on to other drugs. And then, you know, within about a year of that, I roll up at Abacare on about 7 different substances where I'm so dehydrated they can't get blood out my veins. Do you know what I mean? Straight for a police station. Go winning. How did I get there?
I remember being that day when you arrived, you know, and that was the first time I met you when you came to Abacare. So speak a wee bit about that then, Dan, if you could. You know, a lot of stuff was going on prior to that, you know, and
but a lot of it was a story.
Yeah.
So I was telling myself a story about how I couldn't cope with the success, right? My idea in the head that I got was I just need to secure my kids' future and then I can just end my life, right? And I started feeling comfort, a sense of comfort. You hear people who are caught up in suicidal ideation and a wee trigger warning for anybody watching, do you know what I mean? I'll go into this for a minute or so. You hear often people feeling a sense of comfort once they've decided that if the circumstances are such that they need to end their life, they're going to do it and they know how they're going to do it, and a sense of comfort comes over them. And often you see people as they head towards that moment, people around them won't notice there's anything wrong with them because they are in a place of they're reconciled to the fact that the pain's going to end soon and they're kind of taking care of their business. And I remember experiencing that. Do you know what I mean? Experiencing that. And in my head, I had this visual. I was like me and the wains and we're in the water and it's like the sea and it's all choppy. And I'm trying to get the kids onto the land. It's like as if we've come off a boat or something. This is the visual.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting insight into our subconscious. In the visual, what I do is I get them up onto the land and then I just let go. And I just fall into the waves and I just go under the water. I don't know where that came from and I don't know why, but that was the narrative I was running with. And it was a sense of being completely overwhelmed. And it was because I'd become completely dislocated through recovery. So I was running off of fear and I was very selfish and dishonest because I'm in addiction. I'm not telling anybody. I'm being celebrated as somebody who's a poster boy for coming through difficult circumstances and making good and not forgetting their old arse. But also I'm spending most of my time around middle class people and TV executives and traveling in first class and flying to New York and living a different quality of life. Do you know what I mean? While I've got this identity that's like, no, you can't do that because you're for the scheme. And if you enjoy your life, you're a sellout. And just listening to all the criticism and forgetting the praise, I was off my nut with it all. When I got into Abbey Care, then, you know, they give you a couple of days to sort of get your shit together in terms of like your detox and whatever you need to go through for your first couple of nights there. But then, you know, it's kind of right, in you go. And it was the first time I had been around ordinary folk for about 2 years where I wasn't the keynote speaker or I wasn't special. And I had a sense when I went in, maybe some of the folk might have knew me or recognised me. But there was no ceremony in there. There was no, oh, Darren McGarvey's here. Do you know what I mean? If anybody even gave a it was humbling in a way that I needed. And then I remember my first session with Marie and she asked me how I was and I started telling her this big story as if I was getting interviewed on the news or something. And she just went like that, stop. And I was like, ow.
Yeah.
Just somebody telling me, stop. People don't talk to me like that. You know, they might have used to, but when you get a name for yourself and you get a certain success attached to you, they don't. And she just did it. And she says, I asked you how you were and you started telling me a story. Why is that, Darren? And I was like, get at me, get at my head. Do you know what I mean? And that really was the genesis of where I'm at now. Or that's the story I'm running with now. That was a big moment, penny drop moment, you know. Somebody being brave enough to offend me by telling me the truth.
Yeah. And with all your successes, Dan, as an author and TV shows and stuff like that, how do you manage that? Would you say ego? It was your ego in the past, or would you say the fear of success as well in there? What?
You make sense of it all later. So really in life, you're rolling with the punches. Sometimes you might sense there's an opportunity that way and you'll push towards it, or you might make a decision and then whether it goes good or bad, you take credit or blame based on it. But the truth is, there are so many other ways our lives could go. A lot of it's out of our hands. We need a story just to feel like it's making sense and has some kind of continuity. What I recognise now is I got myself into that state because one, I was running with a false identity, right? One, I was lying about using, right? Well, trading on an image of being recovered or lying by omission. Second, I was ashamed of the fact that I wasn't poor. I was ashamed of the fact that I was comfortable financially. I felt like I owed it to somebody that I had done well, and therefore my life must be some kind of sacrifice to somebody. And in my head, it was always these activists that criticised me all the time. A lot of them, no experience of life, no kids, never had a real job. They live in university libraries, or they about in the lower levels of trade union movements. No offence to them. Do you know what I mean? But these were the people I really wanted to impress.
Right.
Just like, you've literally got sometimes, a million eyes on you. And the people that you want to impress are the people who don't buy your book, don't read your book, don't give a about you. The only time they want to talk to you is criticise you. Of course I was going to collapse under the weight of that. You know what I mean? Because my identity had changed. My class position had changed. My experiences were changing. But I got caught up in trying to perform a role as the working class hero who'd done good and didn't forget his old arse. When actually most of my audience, what they're into is me reflecting on things. Even if they disagree with my politics, they like the way that I self-reflect. They like my temperament. They like the way that I can laugh at myself. All these other self-serious activist types, they don't like it about me. Do you know what I mean? I'm something they can just project onto. And, I have to let go of all that. And that's the journey I'm on now. And in the book, I talk about a recent traumatic event. I don't go into the details yet, but I use it to show them I know what trauma is. You know what I mean? And ironically, the way it worked out was that the traumatic event in my life happened, and it totally changed the book, because the tone I take in the book is just a lot more sensitive and thoughtful than it might have been before, where trauma was merely an abstract idea. And I think with that tone, it will give me a bit of latitude with readers to push them in ways that most people who write books about trauma don't. What's your part in this pain that you're in now? I know it's not your fault the wound happened, but if you're still carrying the wound after this amount of time, what role might you be playing in that? Have you built an identity around this? Have you slipped into a victim mindset? How do you let go of this stuff? Is your activism really activism, or is it avoidance for pain? Is it really caused by somebody trying to oppress you? Or is it caused because your mum and dad never gave you the time and love that you needed and you just want to feel seen? Because if you're operating for A wounds and you don't know it, you're never going to find a solution out there. And that's what I've learned.
So that's something that's really interesting that you've touched on that as well, and maybe a wee bit like recovery from addiction, recovery from trauma. How often are you able to say, I've got trauma, share about the problem, and no move in to attempts to find a solution? You know, I know it's different levels of trauma, isn't it? It's going to be a different journey for people. You need to be the right people. Not everybody can just walk out the house and pay X amount for a therapist, and stuff like that. But it's brave of you speaking about that. So what are you doing about it, and how much are you enabling?
And I think it's empowering. You get a certain section out there who will say that's invalidating somebody's trauma, or that's dismissing their experience. But I think it's all about the tone you take and what your experience is. So I'm not talking from an uber privileged vantage point. Although I know I enjoy certain privileges, do you know what I mean? Especially these days. But one thing that the platitude-ridden discourse around trauma, which is all these wee kind of hashtags and maxims, and it's okay to not be okay, and hurt people. Let's break them down. Do you know what I mean? What does hurt people mean? Because if you are telling me that you were traumatized as a result of somebody else who hurt you, and they hurt you because they were hurt, then it stands to reason that if you're not healed, you could be hurting other people. And this is the thing about trauma nobody wants to talk about. Everybody wants to go, here's how I was wounded, here's how I act out on my wounds. I'm obsessive compulsive. I lock the door 55 times. I don't like to sleep in the dark. I don't like to watch a certain type of film. I freak out when I see Jerry Sadovitz, right? Whatever it is. You think that's the only way your trauma's manifesting? Or you just one of these special people where the trauma doesn't manifest as harm for other people around you? People feeling you a bit emotionally inconsistent. People thinking maybe you're a bit highly critical. People think you're an unreliable person. You're not a safe person to share problems with. In my case, my trauma manifests as a deep selfishness, you know, because I was always triggered. So your needs are just too much for me to handle. So they get dismissed or minimized, you know, and I tell myself a goodies and baddies story. And anybody that is down with me doing whatever I want is a goodie. And anybody that's no, them, you know. And everybody's trauma manifests different, but that's something that's one of the stories of trauma nobody wants to tell.
Yeah.
I tell that story in this book. Do you know what I mean?
Amazing. So, we'll speak a wee bit about the book for a second, Paul. What we like time wise? Are we okay? So we'll speak a wee bit about your new book coming out. Would be readers expecting to read in this? What's different about maybe for your past books? What should we expect?
Hopefully, what they're gonna get is a wee bit more of what they probably want for me, right? Which is that blend of personal with political and critique. A lot of lessons I've learned over the last few years are brought to bear with this book, and they're not just life lessons about trauma. They're lessons about me accepting, for better or worse, that the people who have actually invested their time and money in supporting my career have done so based on a certain product that I've sold them, which I'm part of. And I need to embrace that and accept that. And if I want to continue on this journey, that's part of the deal. But what I'm trying to negotiate with my audience is that I'm going to do that on terms that are safe and honest. And if you're not into it, then that's fine. But also what you're going to get is a book that covers what trauma is, the rise of it as a concept, the rise of catharsis culture, this idea that we would just tell stories to hear ourselves say them, not because we want any feedback on them, not because we want any insight. We just think talking about it's going to heal us. And the implications of all of that, you know? And then as the book progresses, it starts to, like trauma and healing, it starts to change. It changes, it mutates. It's non-linear in terms of hammering home the points in a way that I think that a lot of people who have written books about trauma can't, because they're academics or they're public figures, or they're writing books about trauma that are primarily focused on telling the story. Mine's is parallel stories. One is the story and there's me deconstructing it as I go and then rebuilding it all, modelling a way of safely telling a story, but also for the general reader who's no in this trauma game to think about the narratives that they attribute to themselves, to think about their identity. So in that sense, it's about mental health as well, you know. We don't need specialists to stop experiencing pain all the time. There are things we can do right now. And the book's got some answers for people, hopefully.
Brilliant, Dan. I'm really looking forward to that coming out. So I asked you last night to pick 3 significant songs for your life. The first one you've chosen is Eminem, Role Model. Why did you choose that, Dan?
Just chose that because, you know, when I started taking hip hop dead seriously, it was because I discovered that song. And it was the song that told me maybe I have a story to tell in hip hop, because he's just talking about his ma and how she's off on that. Know what I mean? And it was a song that changed the trajectory in my life. You know what I mean? So anything for that era, Eminem is imprinted in my mind.
So see if we go back to what we were speaking about earlier, and that was somebody that influenced you to kind of write that way or disclose. So Eminem was somebody who disclosed an awful lot, and he was praised for it initially. Then it's like what always happens, isn't it? Media try and turn that back round, don't they, to try and use against him. So I think that's a great reflection of what we were speaking about earlier.
And he modelled that in music.
Yeah.
A lot of people drew from their life, but he was the first big global superstar who got famous for talking the way somebody on Jerry Springer talks. You know what I mean? And really that did model a kind of way of talking about your experiences, which is fun, cathartic, but not always safe and not always true.
Brilliant. And second song, Kendrick Lamar, United in Grief.
It's well, that song, fun enough, that album came out when I was went back into Abbeycare for a week just as a precaution,
Yeah.
um, a few years back, and I remember that album coming out in the opening track and realizing, as I had realized back in 2018 when my book was coming out,
Mm.
and he dropped an album then as well, that despite the differences in our experiences, the kind of journey that he's been on in his life and the things he's learning about his life, coming for the community he has, them being kind of celebrated in an industry, the conflicts that come in.
Mm.
I get a lot of stuff for him, even though his journey's totally different and he's a global icon. The internal world that he's got going on in amongst it all, it's very similar to the average person in the way he puts it across. So that opening track on that album, do you know what I mean? It was like it just dropped at a time where I was kind of having to reassess certain things, and the way it kicks in, it's just one of the best openers to an album. It's got these amazing like carnival drums and all that. Just really gets you like pumped up. Do you know what I mean?
Brilliant, Dan. Number 3, Aesop Rock, Blood Sandwich.
Oh, just one of the best storytelling tracks that's ever been written by one of the best rappers that's ever lived. You know what I mean? And he's not a rapper that a lot of people will know of, but the real lyricists know the script. This is a guy who just pays a lot of attention to detail, but this song is really a dedication to his brothers, and he writes these beautiful verses that go into so much detail about aspects of their childhood, but with the attention to detail of a screenwriter,
Okay.
and really setting the scene, the characters, those moments characters have that affect you. But it's in a hip hop song, so for me, it was really first time I heard that. I thought, man, he's actually pushed the genre forward, because you can actually apply those storytelling techniques to a song. And for me, that was a kind of turning point in my music as well.
Brilliant, Dan. Thank you. Okay, just to kind of finish us off, Dan. If somebody's out there and they're aware they've got experience of trauma, but they're struggling, what would you be advised to be to somebody that's going through that at the moment?
Do a lot of research that's looking at different perspectives on it. Recovery is a bit like the gym. It's easy to announce you're going to do it than actually do it. You know what I mean? And at first, when we go in, we're going to move towards what feels good, and what feels good is what's easy. And that includes how we talk about it. So see, the things that we tell, the stories we tell, that's a reflection on what we find easiest to talk about. The healing's in the stuff that's no easy to talk about. You know what I mean? So be aware there's a big buffet out there where trauma can just become a supplementary accessory to your identity. You can diagnose all the people in your life, you can come up with all the theories and but you're still fundamentally going to be the same person who struggles with the same things. And that, like a gym program that's badly designed, is going to tank your motivation, and you'll just get up and throw in the towel, which is what most people do in the end. What you want to do is go out there and look for things that challenge you a wee bit. The thing that frightens you, the thing that you think deep down might be the thing, might be the thing. You know what I mean? Listen to that voice that's saying, no, you know it's this, you know it's no neurodivergence, or you know you're an alcoholic, it's no ADHD, whatever it is, right? Follow that intuition, because the thing is, like, it's never going to be rubber stamped and you can't change it. But move towards the thing that doesn't necessarily feel like it's the easiest thing that's there. And I think that applies to any journey. It involves kind of healing or insight. With trauma, it'd be brilliant if I need help, and the help came.
Yeah.
That's not the world we live in, and the book covers this in a lot of depth. We're going to be called upon to move into action ourselves by going and finding a community. And that community can be around anything, but it's a community that's focused on a solution, know the problem. And that's the difference. We need to find a solution-focused community, and just by virtue of being around other people, we experience relief for the symptoms. Then we find people who seem to be doing well, and we ask them, how did you become well? And that's where the journey starts. They tell us, and then we try it.
And do you believe that's the space where we share our story? You know, when others come to us who have see that we've been through similar, and then we
Yeah.
share on our experience of how we've actually progressed with it, rather than
Aye.
spilling my trauma or our addiction back the way onto somebody else who's currently struggling.
Aye, because it gives us practical information. So on social media, somebody will just say a general statement like, you're operating from woundedness,
Mm.
right? And you're kind of sitting there like that, right? Where are these wounds? You know, you're checking your skin, you're da 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 da. You talk to somebody who's been on a journey and they'll be like, you know, well, for me, you know, the woundedness is, you know, like say my missus is out and she's not told me what time she's coming
Mm.
back, right? And she doesn't phone me. It gets to a point in the at the night where I start to feel anxious. My woundedness is when I accuse her of no caring about me when she's no phoned, instead of saying,
Yeah.
you know, when I know you're just having fun and you're not even, it's not a big deal, but I just want you to know, and I make myself vulnerable here. It makes me feel this way. And their response will be, oh, I had no idea. I'm sorry. Next time I'll give you a wee message.
Yeah.
And that's how you operate in a healing capacity. Woundedness is when all the toxicity comes in. Only somebody who's been through that can explain that. An Instagram or TikToker who's doing it for the clout or the likes, doesn't matter how much knowledge they've got, that the actual mechanics of the social media platform demand that they trivialize serious things, demand that they sensationalize or sentimentalize
Mhm.
serious things, because that's what draws us in. It's entertainment, it's comfort food, it's a good starting point, but that's not how you get well. You get well in relationships that are supportive, validating, but also where you'll be challenged, where you'll be held accountable. And, you know, that's the basic ingredients, I think, for any healing journey, whatever it might be.
Thank you so much, Darren. And thank you, Dan, for coming on the show today. Thank you
pleasure.
for being so open, and thanks for your friendship.
No worries, man.
Thank you.
But I'm sailing down the river alone, still trying to find my way back home. And I don't believe in magic. Life is automatic, and I don't